I want to tell you what my company does before I tell you what happened at Glenna Property, because what my company does is the context that makes what happened mean something beyond a strange story. I am 46 years old. I have been running Ridgeline Animal Control and Recovery for 18 years. We operate throughout the mid-Atlantic and southeastern states, handling what the industry calls high-end nuisance wildlife situations. The jobs that local animal control and state wildlife agencies either lack the equipment or the authorization to manage themselves. My team captures and relocates problem black bears that have become habituated to residential areas. We handle exotic animal escapes from private collections and roadside zoos, which happens more often in rural states than most people realize. We assist state agencies with large predator situations when the situation requires live capture rather than the alternative. The work is physically demanding and occasionally dangerous, and it requires the specific combination of field knowledge and equipment expertise and calm decision-making that comes from spending 18 years in close proximity to large frightened animals until large frightened animals are no longer the kind of thing that overwhelms your ability to think. My team is 3 people. Pete, who is 51 and who has been with me since the company's early years, is my equipment specialist and the person I trust most when a job goes sideways in the field. Carla, who is 38 and who came to us from a state wildlife agency in Virginia, is the best tracker I have ever worked with, and the person who's read of a field situation I rely on when the situation is not matching what I expected it to be when I drove out to it. We are not a large company. We are a very good small one. We have a reputation in the industry for taking difficult jobs and finishing them, and I have spent 18 years protecting that reputation because it is what the company is built on. It is also, I later understood, why Alderman Holdings chose us for the Glenna Property contract. The contract came through a property management company called Alderman Holdings, representing a private estate of several thousand acres in the hill country of Harrow County, West Virginia. The estate was called Glenna Property in the contract documents. The job description was the live capture and secure transport of a large predatory animal that had been causing significant livestock losses and property damage on and around the estate for the preceding 3 months. Live capture specified throughout. The fee was more than double what I would normally charge for a bear job, with a completion bonus for successful live capture. I read the contract carefully. I called Alderman Holdings with questions. The representative I spoke with was professional and thorough on the surface details and vague in the ways that I would later understand were specific and intentional. I asked what species they believed the animal was. He said the county wildlife officer who assessed the damage believed it was a large black bear, possibly an unusually large male, given the character of the damage. I asked for the damage assessment report. It arrived the next day. The damage was consistent with a large bear in some respects and inconsistent in others. I put the inconsistencies in the part of my mind I keep for things I expect to understand better when I am on the ground, and I took the contract. In 18 years of this work, the inconsistencies in a damage report have always resolved on site into something I had a category for. This was the first time they did not. We arrived at Glenna property on a Monday morning in late September. The truck and trailer, loaded with the full equipment suite for a large animal capture operation. Heavy gauge capture cages, net launcher, the full pharmaceutical kit with tranquilizer and reversal agents, the containment trailer rated to 600 pounds. I have learned over 18 years to bring more than I expect to need. The private road to the estate ran through the kind of hill country that discourages casual visitors. Dense second-growth forest on both sides, and the specific closed-in feeling of terrain that is simultaneously beautiful and indifferent to you. The main buildings of the estate, a large farmhouse, and outbuildings and a working cattle operation, sat in a cleared valley ringed by forested hills. The on-site property manager was a woman named June, mid-50s, competent and efficient in the way of someone who has managed a large property for a long time and who knows the difference between a problem that requires her attention and a problem that requires someone else's. She was waiting for us in the farmyard when the truck came up the road, and she was more relieved to see us than a livestock loss situation would warrant. I noticed this. I filed it. She took us to the damage sites. There were 4 of them, distributed across the western and northern portions of the property near the forest margins, and I walked through each one with Carla and Pete. The picture that assembled itself was not the picture the damage report had prepared me for. The livestock losses were real, and the physical damage to the fencing and outbuildings was real. But Carla, who has more bear experience than anyone I know, started flagging inconsistencies within 20 minutes of the first sight and did not stop. The force applied to the fencing was wrong for a bear. The height of the damage to the outbuilding walls was wrong. The pattern of the livestock kills was wrong in ways that she described to me quietly as wrong for everything she could think of, not just bears. I asked June directly if there was anything about the animals she knew that was not in the damage report. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said it was easier to show us. She took us to the farmhouse office and pulled up footage from 3 trail cameras the estate had placed at the damage sites over the preceding 2 months. In 18 years, I have looked at a great deal of trail camera footage. I know what bears look like on camera at night, and what mountain lions look like, and what exotic escapes look like, and what feral hogs look like. I know the catalogue of large animals that could produce the damage I had walked through that morning. The footage showed damage occurring. It did not show what was causing it. I want to be clear that this was not a technical failure. The cameras were functioning correctly and the footage was clear and the motion detection was working. What the footage showed was fencing coming down, outbuilding walls being struck from outside, and in one sequence, a gate being lifted completely off its hinges. And in every sequence, the thing causing the damage was not in the frame. It was as though whatever was doing this understood precisely where each camera was positioned and was staying outside the capture area while remaining close enough to cause damage it was clearly causing. Pete watched the gate sequence 3 times without saying anything. Then he said quietly that whatever lifted that gate understood where the camera was. I asked June how long this had been going on. 3 months, she said. Same as the contract. I asked if she had seen it directly. She said once, briefly, at dusk. at the northern tree line. Poor light, not close. She said she did not want to describe what she saw because she was not confident her description would be accurate, and she did not want to send us in with wrong expectations. In 18 years, I have never had a client say that to me. It was the most professionally useful thing she said in that first conversation. I asked what she wanted to tell us that she had left out of the report. She looked at the paused image on the screen, the gate hanging at an angle from a hinge that something had bent. She said the thing they had hired us to find was not behaving like an animal. It had been on the property for 3 months, and it had never been captured on any of the 8 cameras they deployed, and she did not believe that was coincidence. She said whatever it was, it understood what the cameras were, and it understood where they were. She said she was glad my company had a reputation for finishing difficult jobs. She said she hoped that reputation held. My pre-operation approach has been refined over 18 years. I position capture equipment at the most likely transit corridors based on Carla's read of the sign, and I run a 3-point perimeter with myself and Pete and Carla covering the highest probability sites, with the standing instruction that the first person to get eyes on the animal calls the others before attempting any approach. The first 2 nights produced nothing. The equipment was undisturbed. The capture sites showed no sign of approach, no activity in the farmyard or the outbuildings. The property was entirely quiet, in the way of a place that knows something has changed in its environment and is deciding what to do about the change. On the 3rd night, Pete said, over the radio, very quietly, that he thought it knew we were there. I thought Pete was right. I changed the approach on the 3rd night. I pulled the visible equipment back, repositioned the capture cages in less obvious locations, removed the net launcher from the western margin entirely. I replaced the visible hardware with what I think of as a soft perimeter. Less equipment, more patience. All 3 of us present in the field with the minimum of gear and the maximum of stillness. Carla took a position inside the forest edge on the western margin rather than at it, a reversal of normal positioning that I approved because Carla's field instincts have never been wrong in 8 years of working together. Pete covered the northern margin from the truck, parked dark with the engine off. I took the position between them at the edge of the farmyard with sightlines to both margins. The night was cold and clear, and I settled into the patient stillness that this kind of work requires. I had been at my position for about 2 hours when Carla's voice came over the radio. Very quiet. She said it was in the forest with her. She said she could hear it, and she was not moving. I was on my feet and moving toward the western margin before she finished the 2nd sentence, and I heard Pete's truck door behind me. What Carla told me afterward, when she had time to organize what she experienced, was this: the awareness came before the sound. The specific physical sense of a large presence very close to her in the dark, and then the sound of it moving in the forest, and the 2 things arriving in that order. Awareness before evidence, in a way she could not fully account for. And the movement she heard was not moving toward her, it was moving around her. In the dark, without light, something very large was executing a slow circuit around her position in the trees with a precision that told her it knew exactly where she was. She did not move. She did what every instinct and every year of field experience told her to do, which was to be still and be exactly what she was and not try to be anything else. When I reached the western margin, I stopped at the tree line and listened. I could hear it moving in the forest, moving away from Carla's position, deeper in, unhurried. Something very large moving through dense nighttime forest with a quietness that was not the quietness of a frightened animal crashing toward cover. It was the quietness of something choosing its volume and choosing to be nearly silent. I tracked it by ear for about 2 minutes. Then it was gone. I found Carla standing at the edge of her position with her flashlight off and an expression on her face that I had not seen in 8 years of working together. I asked if she was all right. She said yes. She said she thought we needed to talk about what we were doing here. I held the team meeting the following morning in the truck, away from the farmhouse, before I was ready to ask certain questions in front of June. I asked Pete and Carla whether either of them believed we were dealing with a known animal species. The silence that followed was its own answer. Pete said the damage pattern was wrong for a bear, and wrong for a mountain lion, and wrong for any exotic escape he could think of. He said the trail camera avoidance was the most troubling thing he had seen in 30 years of wildlife work, because it implied an understanding of the cameras that a wild animal did not have. He said the size of what he heard moving in the northern margin on the second night, audible through closed truck windows, did not match any native species for this region. Carla said the thing she was most certain of after her experience in the tree line was that it had known where she was before it was close enough for normal sensory detection to account for it. The circuit it walked around her was deliberate and precise and executed with the confidence of something that was not concerned about her and was making that point clearly. She said she had worked with bears for most of her career, and bears did not do that. She said nothing she had worked with did that. I asked them what they wanted to do. Pete said he wanted to know what Alderman Holdings had actually hired us to capture. Carla said she thought June knew more than she had told us, and that before any further field operation, we should have a direct conversation with her about what was actually on this property. I went back to the farmhouse and asked June to sit down with me. June had been the on-site manager at Glenna for 11 years. Before her, there was a man named Gerald who held the position for 20 years. And before Gerald, a succession of managers going back to the estate's establishment in the early 1900s. The knowledge June had about what lived in the forested hills above the Glenna Valley was not knowledge she developed herself. It was knowledge she inherited with the job, passed from Gerald to her the way Gerald received it from the person before him, in a conversation that she described as the most unusual professional briefing she had ever received. She told me this at the kitchen table, with her hands around a coffee cup and the directness of someone who had decided that what she held back in the first conversation was no longer practical to hold back. The property had had something living in the forested hills above it for longer than the estate had existed in its current form. The Alderman family had always known about it. It was not dangerous to people who did not approach it or attempt to interfere with it, and the estate's management approach for the entirety of its history had been to leave it alone and maintain the forest margins as undisturbed as possible. I asked why it was coming onto the property now, when it apparently had not before. She said there was logging done on the adjacent county land over the summer, a timber operation that came within a quarter-mile of the estate boundary on the northern side, and she believed the disturbance had pushed the thing down into the valley margins in ways it would not otherwise have come. I asked why Alderman Holdings wanted it captured, rather than simply waiting for the disturbance to settle and the animal to return to its normal range. June set down her coffee. She said Alderman Holdings did not want it captured to remove a nuisance. She said the contract was not a nuisance wildlife contract. It was an acquisition contract. The Alderman family had been trying to secure this particular animal for decades, and the logging disturbance bringing it down to the margins was the closest it had been to accessible in all the years the family had owned the property. I asked what they wanted it for. She said she did not know. She said she had worked for this family for 11 years, and there were aspects of their interests that she had understood were not hers to ask about, and this was one of them. She said she told me she hoped our reputation for finishing difficult jobs would hold because she was not sure what Alderman Holdings would do next if this approach failed, and the alternatives she imagined were worse than us. I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked her what she saw at the northern tree line that evening at dusk, the thing she had not wanted to describe. She was quiet for a while. She said it was large and upright, and it was looking at her from the tree line with an attention she could feel before she could see it. When she finally saw it, she understood two things at the same time. The first was that it was aware of her in a way no wild animal had ever been aware of her. The second was that it was aware of the estate itself, the buildings, and the operation and the years of human habitation in the valley, in a way that suggested it had been watching all of it for a very long time. She said she walked back to the farmhouse slowly and did not look back, and she had not been to the northern margin at dusk since. I went back to the truck and told Pete and Carla everything. We sat with it for a long time. The conversation that followed was the most difficult professional conversation I have had in 18 years. And what came out of it was this. We would make one more attempt using everything we had. And if that attempt failed, or if what we found in the capture was outside the bounds of what our equipment and our experience could safely handle, we would withdraw from the contract. I believed, going into the final attempt, that it would fail. I believed the thing in the hills had a sufficient understanding of what we were doing that it would continue to avoid us, as it had been avoiding us. I had been in this field for 18 years, and I had never worked with anything that so consistently and precisely managed its exposure to human observation and equipment, and I expected that consistency to hold. I was wrong. On the fourth night, in the early hours before dawn, the thing walked into the capture enclosure at the northern margin, not because it was confused or lured or outmaneuvered by the approach I had designed. I want to be clear about this because the clarity of it is the part I keep returning to. It walked into the enclosure with the same deliberate, unhurried quality that had characterized every piece of evidence we had gathered about it over 4 nights. and the enclosure doors closed on the trigger mechanism. And I was at the site within 4 minutes, and the thing was inside. I turned my light on it. I am not going to describe it in detail. I want to be honest about why, because I think readers of this kind of account deserve honesty about the choices being made in it. It is not because a detailed description would be unbelievable, although it would be. It is because describing it precisely would mean naming it, and naming it would mean putting it into a category, and I am not willing to offer a category for something that I spent 18 years believing did not exist, and that I now know exists because it walked into my capture enclosure at 4 in the morning and is looking at me from inside it. I will say it was large. I will say it was looking at me. The quality of the looking was the quality that June described and Carla described. The full and directed attention of something that had been aware of me for longer than I had been aware of it, and that was entirely unfrightened by the current situation. I have had large predators look at me in capture enclosures. I know what a frightened bear looks like in a cage at close range, and I know what an apex predator assessing an unfamiliar threat looks like. This was neither of those things. I will say one more thing about it, and then I will say what I actually believe. I do not believe it walked into the enclosure because the enclosure worked. I believe it walked in because it decided to. I do not know why it decided to. I have been thinking about this since September, and I have not arrived at an answer that satisfies me. I have arrived at several answers that I do not like and that I cannot disprove. The Alderman Holdings transport team arrived at Glenna property 8 hours after I made the call to the contract number. 3 unmarked vehicles and a specialized transport container that told me, in the language of equipment, that they had done this before. The container was not improvised. It was purpose-built for something of specific dimensions, and those dimensions matched what was in my enclosure. They had done this before. They transferred the animal from my enclosure to their container with the efficiency of people who know exactly what they are doing. And in the transfer, I caught one more look at what I had spent 4 nights in the field trying to capture. The look had in it the same thing that had been in every encounter I had with this animal, the full and undivided attention of something that had understood the situation from a position of complete awareness since before I drove up the private road from the county route. I took the completion bonus. I drove my team home. We did not speak much on the drive back, the 3 of us, which was not normal for us, but which felt correct for the specific quality of what we were all carrying. I have not taken a contract from Alderman Holdings since, and I will not. After returning home, I looked into the company's registration and found a network of property holdings across 7 states, all rural, all large acreage, all with ownership histories going back several generations. I did not pursue this further. I made a deliberate decision not to pursue it, which is itself something I have thought about, because I have never in 18 years deliberately chosen not to understand something about a job I completed. I made the choice because I looked at what I knew and what knowing more was likely to cost, and I decided the cost was more than I wanted to pay. I want to say something to anyone in the wildlife capture and relocation industry who receives a contract with an unusually high fee and a damage report that does not quite fit the species it nominally describes. Ask more questions before you sign. Ask specifically why live capture is required and what the client intends to do with the animal after transfer. Ask who the end client is beyond the property management intermediary. Ask if anyone on site has seen the animal directly, and ask them to describe what they saw fully before you make any decisions about your approach. I am not telling you not to take the contract. I took the contract. I completed it. My team came through physically unharmed, and I was paid. I am telling you to go in, knowing what you are actually going into, as much as the client will allow you to know, and then a little more, because in my experience, the clients who cap the information at a specific level are always capping it at the level that serves their interests. And in this particular job, my interests and my client's interests were not the same thing. My interest was in completing the job safely and professionally and bringing my team home intact. Their interest was in acquiring something they had been trying to acquire for a long time. I completed their interest alongside mine, and I have not yet decided how I feel about that. 18 years in this work, and I have never been uncertain about whether a job I completed was the right thing to complete. I am uncertain about this one. The uncertainty lives in the part of the fourth night that I have not told you yet. During the transfer, when the Alderman Holdings team was moving the animal from my enclosure to their container, there was a moment when the transfer required the animal to pass between the two enclosures through a brief open space of about 3 feet. In that moment, in that 3-foot gap, it looked at me one final time. I have been in close proximity to hundreds of large animals in 18 years. I have a working vocabulary for what animals communicate when they look at you, the threat assessment and the fear response and the aggression and the submission and all the things a large animal's attention means when that attention is directed at you from close range. What was in that last look was none of those things. I have been trying to find the right word for it since September. I have tried a dozen words and set them all aside because none of them were exactly right. The closest I have come, the word I keep returning to when I think about that 3-foot gap and what was in it, is acknowledgement. It looked at me the way you look at someone when a shared experience is ending and you want to mark that it happened. Not gratitude, and not threat, and not fear. Something more mutual than any of those. Something that required two parties who were both fully present and fully aware of each other to be real. It acknowledged me. I do not know what it was acknowledging. I do not know if I was the one being acknowledged or if it was acknowledging something larger. The full situation, the estate and the hills and the years of watching from the tree line and whatever comes next for it in the purpose-built container of an organization that has been trying to acquire it for decades. I do not know where it is now. I think about that more than I think about most things I've seen in this work. I have been doing this for 18 years, and I know how to process the difficult parts of difficult jobs. I know how to set things down. I have never had trouble setting a job down before. I am having trouble with this one. What I keep coming back to, in the quiet of the office where I sit writing this, is not the size of it, or the camera avoidance, or the circle in the forest around Carla, or any of the things that told me over 4 nights that I was not dealing with a known animal. What I keep coming back to is that it walked into the enclosure. It understood what the cameras were from the first week and avoided them for 3 months. It tracked our entry approaches from different directions and monitored us outside the drainage and executed a precise circuit around my best field operator in the dark without disturbing a single leaf she could have heard. And then on the 4th night, it walked in. I have one explanation for that, and I do not like it, and I cannot disprove it. The Alderman family has been trying to acquire this animal for decades. Whatever they want it for, whatever purpose the purpose-built container serves, whatever happens next in whatever facility that container is headed to, the animal walked into my enclosure on the 4th night after demonstrating for 3 months that it was entirely capable of never walking into anything we set. It let itself be captured. I do not know why. I am not sure I am the right person to understand why. I think about the acknowledgement in that last look, and I think about the 11 years of June's tenure and the 20 years of Gerald's before her, and the long, unbroken line of property managers who knew what was in the hills and kept the buffer and left it alone. And I think about the Alderman family and their decades of trying. And I think about what it means that the thing finally allowed itself to be taken by the first team that came to it after a summer of logging disturbance, pushed it down from where it had been living undisturbed. I think about whether walked into the enclosure is even the right way to describe it, whether let us take it is closer, whether there is a difference. I drove home in September with my team and my completion bonus, and I have not been back to Harrow County, and I will not go back. The job is done. The contract is closed. In 18 years, that has always been the end of it. This one does not feel like the end of anything. I do not know what it feels like the beginning of. I'm trying not to think about that. I am not entirely succeeding.